Hey everyone, my name is Gavin, and today I'm going to be reviewing the 1994 Spider-Man cartoon. So without further ado, let's get into this. Starting with the positives of the show, to be honest, there's a lot to love here. I think with it is the fact that I don't read many Spider-Man comics, but it feels comic accurate because the whole show, as the farther you go along, it feels like a comic book, and that's not even with the storytelling. Because the thing is, the storytelling, it feels so comic booky because of how it goes a lot more grounded at the beginning, and then as we go along with the show, we realize that it gets more fantasy-like and sci-fi-like. And that's normally what happens with comic books. I haven't read any of the Spider-Man comics, but I just know that as basic knowledge from the amount of comics that I've read, and I love the way it progresses in that way. It progresses like comic books. And another thing is, I've heard some people say that they don't like the animation, and that doesn't hold up. But to me, it feels more like the motion of a comic book. It feels like how a comic book would move, and I absolutely love that about it. Like, I love Spider-Verse, but it doesn't move like a comic book. This show, however, moves like a comic book. Also, the voice acting is brilliant. I don't really know any of the names, but Kingpin is one of the biggest ones that comes to mind. Just the voice feels like Wilson Fisk, and just like, you can't really see anyone playing these characters. The thing is, they feel like the way they're being represented with their voice. This feels like the voice for Peter Parker, and this feels like the voice for Hobgoblin, which, by the way, that voice is terrifying and very creepy. And there's voices like that that just work so elegantly, and you can really tell that they really did try hard to have these great voice performances. And another thing that I absolutely adore about this show is it feels like the Raimi movies. I think maybe Raimi took some inspiration from the show, because if he did, I wouldn't be surprised, because it feels a lot like those films. I mean, yeah, it does. It really does feel like those movies, with how it's kind of cheesy, but at the same time, there's these perfect, amazing storylines in it. Like, the thing is, which is another thing that's great about it, is the fact that it takes these comic book storylines that you wouldn't think would work in a TV show, but it blends them so well. It works so brilliantly because they have this show where they develop all these plot lines and they blend them together to create something so articulate. And that's just what works so well about this show. That is one of the main reasons why I adore this show in so many aspects. And another thing is, at the beginning of the show, he doesn't really struggle as Peter Parker, really. He doesn't, at the beginning, I'm like, okay, well, it's been the first 3 episodes, he hasn't really done anything. Are we not gonna go this route at all? And the thing is, we realize as the show goes on, oh, he hates being Spider-Man. He hates being the hero, but he knows he has to do it. And then once we get to the end of the show, where he meets Stan Lee, and it's the final episode, he learns to love being Spider-Man. He learns to love being the life that he has. And the thing is, you wouldn't expect this from a Saturday morning cartoon show, for them to take the first episode and have a progressive arc for Peter Parker in the entire show, which is just so brilliant. It fascinates me that they were able to do this, and I love it so much. Also, besides a couple of origin stories, most of the time we get a brief explanation of their origin, but the thing is, they do it so well where it just works so nicely that we don't even care if it's kind of exposition. And that's part of that's another thing that just fascinates me about the show. And of course, they had a lot of limits with the show, actually, which is kind of shocking the more you think about it. Like, the fact that they couldn't be too dark with the show, and it had to be accessible for toys. And the thing is that they did that, but at times it works to the advantage. They can't say that the Carnage was a serial killer, but it's more about the mystery behind him, the curiosity that we have with him, that I think works so well. And the thing is, they kind of go briefly over Wilson Fisk's backstory, and when his son is locked up in jail, he's worrying about when his son will do the same thing that he ended up doing to his father. And there's this show, it has no right to be as good as it is. It has no right to be this intricate, this brilliant, and this much character in such a show, especially when you think when they start getting very comic booky by the end of it, you're thinking, how are they going to do this? They give Peter an arc, and they end it. We don't see the real, spoiler alert, I guess, I'll put timestamp right here for spoiler, but we don't see Mary Jane we don't see Mary Jane at the end of the show, the real Mary Jane, because it was a clone, and the reason why that is because Peter's arc was completed, and that's what mattered. That's what mattered about the show, was Peter's arc being finished. We know he's going to meet up with the real Mary Jane. We know that because they tell us at the end of it, but we don't need to see all of that because it ended. It did what it needed to do, and that is something so powerful about this show. Now moving on to the negatives, which, to be honest, I have very little issues with this film. I mean, not film, TV show. But I think one of my few issues I have with it is sometimes there's some comic book storylines that just don't interest me and are just kind of boring, to be honest. Like, Hobgoblin is just an excuse for Green Goblin. As much as I love the voice, I don't really care about the villain or anything, and I found the villain pretty generic overall. But to be fair, though, there's very minimal wrong with this show. And the thing is, I guess another issue is that Matt Murdock never returns, even though he's supposed to take out the Kingpin and he wants revenge so badly. Why doesn't he ever return? But that's the only issue I really have with this show, to be honest. Those are like the very minimal ones. If you are a Spider-Man fan, check this show out. I highly recommend it. And yeah, that's it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.